we started to see the fact that you could produce things anywhere in the world. That's a classic value disruptor. What it ultimately meant is that there's a big drive to be able to create things faster, cheaper, and in places in the world where you've never been, but you could get that product, and you get that product overnight, which is amazing. It blew our minds. There was an upsurge of products that were made in China. And the typical expression of this is when you're outsourcing the call centers in different parts of the world. You had design, you had software engineering happening in Eastern Europe. There are all these things happening all over the world, but it blew our minds because production now was no longer local, but you could get the value wherever you were. A classic value disruptor for us was understanding the fact that distribution became a non-factor. We have to think about once upon a time where to get something physically, it was difficult, and to get something physically, you had to put it in the post, and the post had to arrive for it to actually become a reality for you. For social and digital, some of those solutions turned to digital, number one, but number two, when organizations are sold for the last mile, it completely removed this artificial barrier to accessing products and services. We started to see huge platformization of platforms like Uber, platforms like Airbnb, locally platforms like Easy Equities did really well in the brokering of financial services and investment products because they were solving for this issue of platformization. How do I match supply and match demand? That blew our minds. It was a classic value disruptor. If we think about this idea around automation and personalization in our era, that was very important because once upon a time you'd get an SMS that wouldn't start with your name. All of a sudden you could say, "Hi Musa," before you spoke to me. It blew our minds. A big part of that enablement was because of the infrastructure that sat behind. So when you look at these classic value disruptors, yes, they created value in some way, shape, or form for Gen Z, but the value that they were looking for was actually fundamentally different. If you think about them as an audience, what's important to them is the digitization of experiences, things like climate change and things like social justice. That become important, they become the forefront, where value for us represented something different. As for Gen Z, the new value disruptors, which you need to be obsessing about on a daily basis, there's two real simple things. The first one is this idea around reputation and ratings. A great place to look around insight for this is within the travel industry. Platforms like Trivago, like Bookings.com, like Cheap Flights, all have built entire business models on understanding how to drive value through reputation and ratings. According to research, they see a direct correlation with the number of 5-star ratings they get and the top line and bottom line of their business. Those of you that book hotels and you book places to go stay, I can guarantee you, you go and look at the reviews at the bottom and you look at the star rating, and psychologically, you log something before you make the decision. The other day I had a plumber arrive at my house, which was the first time it happened to me. His name was Bonan. He was called out and he came and he arrived on site, did his thing, and he was about to leave. And I had a chat with him and he came to me and he said, "Please can you get your phone?" I said, "Well, I'm taking my phone, just get your phone." So he stepped me through opening up my phone, going to the page where he got a rating, and he told me to press the 5-star rating. And I was like, "Why must I press the 5-star rating?" He says, my boss says that when people press 5 stars, it means that we get more business. Right? So there's a direct correlation that's happening between ratings, reviews, and our ability to drive business. And how is that incorporated into the products that we're building? The second thing that we need to be aware of is this experience and emotion thing. These two levers are quite interesting, and sometimes they seem to be a little bit esoteric, especially to us millennials who like hard things. So emotions and experiences are really important for us to understand. How many have watched the Fire Festival? The most amazing festival that didn't happen. Built by really phenomenal entrepreneurs who were borderline dodgy. But what they did is they created something that didn't exist. They used the power of FOMO to be able to get people excited about it, and they ultimately weren't able to deliver on it. They promised an experience, and they promised emotions. The sum total of their marketing efforts was a catamaran with 6 models and a great photographer. Right? And they created an emotion and a feeling that everyone felt they needed to come to. Within a matter of hours, they had sold out tickets that were priced in the thousands. Right? And we think about that as a reality of what was done in our generation. The other thing we need to consider is when you think about these two levers, and you think about what our current generation, Gen Z, are experiencing, this lever of reputation ratings and emotion experiences is really what's helping them make a lot of decisions. And when they start to see that the decisions that they're making are being confirmed by their network and the network effect of them being able to show up within their social context, it helps them to get confidence in the direction of the decisions they need to make. I asked my 2 kids before I came here what service provider they used, and they said to me, "What's that?" And I explained. I said, when you connect with your phone, they said, what's a service provider? I said, "Oh, it's people that allow you to be able to do things like make calls and accidents." And they go, "Oh, okay." 2 days ago, I asked my son, because he has had to make a booking. He goes to Legends Barber, right? Something for these Gen Zs. Goes to Legends Barber. I said, okay, no problem, you can go. Just make sure you phone and you make the booking. All morning, I'm saying to him, you made the booking. He says, no, they're not answering their phone. I said, are you sure? He says, no, they're not answering their phone. I said, make a call, the phone rings, and I put it down. I look at his phone, and I press *11, you know what we do. And he didn't have airtime, right? And I said to him, do you know you don't have airtime? He said, what's that? Right? And I said to him, the thing that used to make calls. Now for him, that's so ubiquitous. The fact that he picks up his phone and it just works, right? It's something that he doesn't want to think about. And so when he has to share that experience, because his friends came around, and then he said to the guys, do you know what this thing is that we call airtime? And his friends also didn't know. But he felt motivated to start sharing this experience. 2 hours later, I see him play a game, and his friend's game is glitching. And he says, hey, do you have airtime? Right? So he's connected this idea around airtime to connectivity. But the important thing is that even with his network of friends at home or a network of friends online where he's gaming with, he's going to take his experience and he's going to explode it into those platforms, which we have to understand. And so the dance between these two things, between emotion and experience, and between the ability to give people the platforms to be able to rate, becomes crucial in our ability to target and disrupt Gen Z. And so the customer that we're looking at now is quite different, because these new value drivers have to become a focus and a specific effort around building out not only our customer experience, but what then happens down the line with everything that we do, even from a development and product perspective. We know that if we get that right, Gen Z will start to show up, because it will allow us to also start thinking about how do we listen more than just putting out messaging. And what I thought I'd share with you is also just a nuance into how, when you start to bridge the gap of understanding where they're at with the generation that came before, you'll find that there are some similarities, but there's also some very clear direction that we get pointed into. I'm going to show you a quick video that starts to highlight the relationship between two people. The first is a multi-hyphenate who we'll all identify with, Pharrell. I'm sure you know who that is. And the second is a gentleman called Tyler, the Creator, who came up in the video earlier. Tyler, the Creator, is an icon for the Generation Zers, and Pharrell is an icon for us millennials. But when they interact together, there's still a dynamic chemistry that happens. But it's also important to understand the principles of value that is exchanged even between them as two very different generations. And so the two words that came up, which were interesting for me, is Pharrell said, make something undeniable and something that is infectious. Right? He spoke a lot about purpose. And for Pharrell, who's continued to reinvent himself, the guy just won't get old, right? He's continued to reinvent himself. He's been cool since we thought we were cool, right? And still, to this day, he shows up in a way that is cool. And there's some fundamentals that he speaks about. Purpose, the fact that you can create things that are undeniable, and the fact that you can create things that are infectious. And so Gen Z are all striving for the same kind of impact on the world. They're looking hard for their purpose, and they're trying to find a way to create stuff that no one can deny, but that everybody's going to want to do, which is infectious. And so just to give you a sense, the three things that are key and important for us to take away from today is technology is important, but it can be a red herring. The second thing is that purpose is more important, and that convenience is going to be the one thing that allows you to press the purchase button before anything else. And so when you go into technology, understand that for us, some of the things that we find to be interesting and absolutely really cool are at the bottom, the SMS level. They're looking at VR, AR as their starting point. So it's baked into what they're expecting from us. So sometimes when we pat ourselves on the back for doing certain things, in fact, that's entry level for Generation Z. And when we think about what this means for our business, consider that even when it comes to advertising. So I'm going to show you a quick clip, which is about Samsung and how they spoke about flip-advertising, which is the way they launched a new range of phones. And number one, it bakes into the fact that they use technology at its core, but it's actually not about the technology, as it can be a red herring for us as marketers. The second thing when you think about it is this idea around purpose. According to research, Gen Z are coming up top when you start engaging them relating to issues like climate change and how they feel about social political issues that are driving the agenda on the continent as well as around the world. We've started to see movements like the SMWX movement that are picking up in South Africa because Gen Zers and other generations are starting to take an acute interest in politics and the modern expression of politics. And for us to think about what that means, not only from a social perspective, but also from a business point of view, is important as we consider the entire value chain. So I'm going to show you a quick case study of Shein, which a lot of you probably have used, and which has become an interesting dichotomy for the Gen Zers, because it solves one interesting and very important problem on the one hand, but also creates a big challenge on the other. And so when you have a generation that appreciates fundamentally the use of technology, but are really driven by principles around doing the right thing and ethics, it creates for very interesting viewing. So we'll discuss it after we check this out. And then lastly, let's talk about convenience. And convenience is ultimately everything that we need to know about making sure that when they need it, they've got it, and they can purchase it right there and then. The thing with convenience, though, is that it's so contextual, hyper-contextual, and technology can allow you to get that right. But similarly, you can't do that on its own. The best businesses that are getting convenience right have also realized that there's a way that you can make a messaging about the impact that you're still having in the communities that you serve and the people that you want to be consuming your brand. So let's have a look at a case study from a convenience point of view. And so the three things that we need to keep in mind is that this generation are born with purpose in mind. Convenience is in their DNA, and the ubiquitous use of technology is something we can't take for granted. And last but not least, we have to keep them entertained. Unfortunately for us, like we'll all see, if you've got any Gen Zers in your homes, entertainment is everything. Right? And we need to figure out the right way to be able to show up in a brand relevant way, but at the same time to ensure that we're able to build bridges with them. I'm going to show you a quick case study of work that we did, fortunately, that took a very interesting concept around Youth Day, where Gen Zers were our core target market, took a very boring proposition like banking, please don't tell my client, and try to bring that closer to Gen Z. And then we took an idea around a platform which is inherently youth in the context of South Africa, but we applied a very different take on it. So we took over the radio station YFM on Youth Day, and we used that as a platform to be able to have the conversations that help people to understand what that represented for South Africa's new history of democracy as we move into a different era. So this just gives you a little bit of a snapshot and why we need to keep the youth entertained and why Gen Z appreciates entertainment. And so I'll leave you this quote from Pharrell, and because you've got such a wonderful idea here around doing this future fits, Pharrell speaks about the fact that as a brand like MTN, you don't wait for the stars to align. You have to reach up and rearrange them the way you want them. In fact, he says you just create your own constellation. And so you've got the unique opportunity to be doing a lot more, because doing is future fit, but it also allows you to take the best of technology and to use that to drive deep connection and deliver value to consumers. And so don't forget the mission, but let's keep our eyes firmly focused on ensuring that we create value for the entire ecosystem. With that, I'll sit back.